Welcome, Ms. Shafiq, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Although you have been working at the IMF for only 2 months, what are your impressions of the fund as a workplace?
Well, I always knew that the fund was famous for having technically excellent staff, but I have to say they're even more impressive up close. So that's been a real pleasure to work with so many talented people. The second thing is, I think from the outside looking in, you have the impression that the fund is a sort of monolith with a very single-minded view of the world. When you're inside the fund, what's really striking is how active the internal debate is. One of the most interesting things for me has been to watch the internal review process whereby policy documents and country documents are cleared, and to see how vigorous the debate is internally as different parts of the organization argue their corner. And that kind of environment of internal challenge is really something I wasn't expecting. I think the third thing is the issue of the work environment for women. I know that there have been allegations that the fund is the IMF is an environment that's hostile to women. That certainly hasn't been my experience, and that certainly hasn't been the experience of the about 700 women who recently wrote to the New York Times saying that the fund was an incredibly professional and respectful work environment that they very much enjoyed. Not always perfect, but certainly not a place that's hostile.
In recent days, the IMF has been under scrutiny for its record on diversity, particularly the number of women in senior managerial ranks. What is the fund doing to address its diversity record?
Well, in fact, the fund met its target to get 20% of the senior managerial levels represented by women. So after meeting that target, I think we all agreed that that wasn't good enough. And a team came together and proposed a new set of targets. So we recently agreed to move toward a target of 25 to 30% of management positions being held by women by 2014. And in the long run, our aspiration is to reach 50-50 at the senior levels. In order to achieve that, we've committed to try to meet a target of recruiting 50% women at all levels going forward, and that will be an essential stepping stone to get us to where we ultimately want to be, which is to truly represent the membership in the world in which we operate. I should also say something about the wider diversity agenda. I recently took a paper to our board about our annual report on how we're doing on diversity. And there were 3 key messages that came out of that. The first was that we'd done well on women, but we could do better. The second was there were 2 regions of the world where we were still quite underrepresented, and that was the Middle East and Africa, and where we're committed to doing a lot more on the recruitment side. And the third issue was trying to a consensus that we needed to look at wider diversity issues, not just nationality and gender, but also educational background, diversity of work experience and perspective, so that we could increase the number of different points of view that we had shaping policies in the IMF.
Ms. Shafiq, what are the important items on the fund's work agenda these days?
Well, I'd say there were 4. The first really is the issue about the recovery and the fact that the economic recovery is still going at 2 speeds. It's not the recovery we wanted. It's not delivering jobs in the advanced countries, and there are risks of overheating in the emerging markets. So we are continuing to do a great deal of work on the issues about resolving the global imbalances and trying to get a different sort of recovery. So the work that we're doing for the G20, for example, and the mutual assessment process, the spillover reports we're doing on the major economies to better understand the interlinkages between the major economies, all of that is essential work to try and get a better global economic recovery. The second key area is responding to the Eurozone crisis. We recently approved a program with the government of Portugal, and we have a team currently working in Greece to try and help that government cope with improving its performance. Clearly, it's a huge issue for the world economy because it will have many impacts more widely, and so the fund is very committed to trying to help the Eurozone area achieve a more sustainable recovery. The third issue is really the issue of responding to events in the Middle East. And there, IMF teams are working closely with governments in countries like Egypt and Tunisia to try and respond to the very legitimate demands of the populations for better social outcomes and designing programs which try and respond to those demands in a way that's economically sustainable. And then the last thing I'd say is our ongoing work with low-income countries. helping them to reduce their poverty challenges, and in the current environment, helping them to cope with the rises in commodity and energy prices, which are really hitting many of the poorest people very much. And we're trying to work with low-income countries to help them design programs to cushion the impact on poor people while maintaining their economic growth rates.
This has been very informative. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.